we've definitely seen a shift and a transition in sort of the wider game state and play and orientation. So it's not that assassination's gone from the game, but that oppressive assassination play style, I think, has certainly been toned down and moderated.
What are your general reflections on where the different factions and armies are at in terms of balance at the moment? Do you remember the first game I ever had?
I knew at some point this conversation would come up.
I can bring it up straight away. I can bring it up right now. The first ever game I had.
I think.
What happened?
You tell
the
like
version.
A full 7 rounds, and I was very open and suggestive as to what you should do.
Hello, welcome to Epic Flail. I'm Northie, and in this video, I'm back with Brett talking about Warmachine. We discuss, is this edition of Warmachine less lethal than previous ones? I asked Brett about feats. Have feats been toned down to something that wouldn't even see play in previous editions? If so, is that a good thing? And in general, is the game more casual than it ever has been before? And is that a good thing or a bad thing for the game? Brett and I reflect on our previous experiences of Warmachine. We give a very honest opinion and appraisal of those experiences versus the game in its current state. We also talk about how balanced the game is in terms of the different factions. I asked Brett a bunch of questions around how the changes to the game have impact on balance. And then we have quite a long and potentially controversial chat around how Warmachine compares to Warhammer 40,000. If you're angry at me and you want to hate me, please use the comment section below to start a conversation with me if that section upset you. I think it was quite an interesting chat, but you never know when you talk about Warhammer 40,000 and compare it to other games. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to the channel. We have all sorts of tabletop gaming content on the channel, so make sure you like and subscribe to get those notifications. If you're a Warmachine fan in particular, keep your eye out on the channel because we are going to be doing some live streams coming up very soon on the channel. You come get involved in those. We'll be doing live podcasts and a whole host of other things, so make sure you subscribe to the channel. Appreciate you watching, and I will see you in a few seconds because it's me talking to Brett. Hello, Brett. Good to see you again, my friend.
Good evening, Paul. How are you?
This is good. I'm well, thanks, mate. This is like the old days, like us talking about Warmachine like twice, 3, 4 times in a week.
Yeah, pretty constantly.
It's a good bit of fun. And since we did the show, there's been a few people that have re-emerged in a few WhatsApp groups and chats that we're in that have resurfaced from the flail days.
In a positive fashion or a negative fashion?
That we will find out, I think, in the coming months. It's nice, isn't it? I feel like we're kind of doing the show the other day. There's been quite a nice buzz about it from some of the people that we've played with for many years.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
In Epic Flail that are back, collecting armies, ordering things again. So, and we're going to see them on the show. We're going to see some new faces on the show in the coming months. So, that's exciting. In today's show, Brett, we're going to get into a little bit more around some of the key features of the game, kind of continue the conversation, the content plan that we talked about last time on the show. So we're going to be talking about how this game plays versus older editions. We're going to pick up on that kind of casual conversation we had last time around. Is this a bit more of a casual game? What are the implications of that? We're going to touch on the factions and how they sit in terms of balance. And then we're going to get into our own experience of Warmachine compared to other games. You've played a lot of MCP. I've played a lot of 40k, so we're going to have a bit of a broader chat around that. So what are your kind of general reflections on how this plays versus previous editions then? One thing we touched on last episode was this concept of the lethality being dialed down a bit. Is that fair to say? Is this a less lethal edition of Warmachine compared to other iterations?
In your first handful of games, probably even like previous editions, if you've played previously and you're trying to wrap your head around, in particular, some of the movement abilities, there's a level of lethality that you didn't know existed previously.
Do you remember the first game I ever had?
I knew at some point this conversation would come up.
I can bring it up straight away. I can bring it up right now. The first ever game I had.
I think.
What happened?
You tell the version. Full 7 rounds, and I was very open and suggestive as to what you should do.
What happened? I'll give you a game. Back room at wherever it was, Guppies in York.
Yeah.
Top of my turn 2. Brett goes, so I can kill you here. Pretty convincingly. I was like, really? Yeah, like, this does this, this does this, this does it, kill that, game over. I was like, oh, could we not do that? And you were like, we're not going to do that, don't worry. Instead, we're actually going to play Warmachine. Just instantly ended the game. And there was a lot of that. There was a lot of that in Warmachine.
Yeah. I think it's important that you recognise that. And the important thing is that I just showed you what could happen. And
yeah. I was like, I don't think so. You were like, okay, we'll just chat it through. That can. I'm like, no, I'm fully dead. Yeah. You can definitely come back as the straight away before after the division.
Sort of second activation in. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good game.
Yeah. Done. No, he's dead. Yeah. Fully gone. But there were a lot of. Sorry, I've maybe disrupted your train of thought. But there were a lot of casters who did have that real. You made one mistake. It could be quite convincingly game over.
Well, and there was definitely certain casters that lent into that play style, wasn't there? And certain lists that sort of lent into that play style. Some of those obscene sort of Legion gun lines and things. Where you show a slither of your base and suddenly Lilith and a couple of Ravagors appear from nowhere. Mage Hunter Strike Force. So those sorts of things definitely existed, didn't they? And it was one of those things that I think it probably did act as a bit of a barrier, do you think, to maybe more casual players?
I think so. I think they've got a bit of a reputation.
The culture around that gaming group wasn't the right sort of supportive, take back or adjust your positioning type culture. If they were just there to like, I can kill you, I'm going to kill you. Yeah, good game. Next.
I think that was one of the biggest challenges of getting the game. It's a bit like chess, isn't it? Like if you are new to chess and you play someone, a grandmaster, you are not going to have a good game of chess for probably forever, unless they go, I'm going to help you get as good as you can at this game, and I'm going to moderate my playstyle to match it, because the game does have this like over, just press a big red button, kill the caster, game over. And it's not a long game, is it? Warmachine, you're not playing it for like 3-4 hours. Like it's like a couple of hour game, so you could just be in situations where someone asserts themselves so strongly, you're just like, I think of like Denegra, who would come up and essentially freeze all your models in place, score a load of points on scenario, go back to your turn, you can't move anything, so you basically know you've lost because they're going to score all the points again. At a casual level, that is brutal. But it was always a bit of a double-sided sword for me, because that is also part of the attraction, I think, to computer games that are particularly popular, online computer games that carry a lot of risk with them. There's a lot of games now where I'm trying to think of the really well-known FPS game, like a survival game, where you kind of go out with your equipment, and if you die, you just lose anything. Right, everything's gone. You lose everything. Whereas Fortnite, you just jump in another game. So I think Warmachine, that was one thing I quite liked about it. There was a higher risk of playing it, because you make one mistake, the whole thing comes crumbling down. But you do lose that casual draw there.
Yeah, and I think we've definitely seen a shift and a transition in sort of the wider game state and play and orientation, certainly towards those assassination orientated lists. I think some of that has come about because of the changes to the prime models, and so the disappearance of some of those legacy warcasters that really took advantage of those sorts of elements of the game. And so things like Denegra to Haley, they've been moved into the legacy, and so those really oppressive play styles, whether that be a really hard scenario push or assassination orientation, has had sort of a soft remove, because most people are sort of playing the prime format, aren't they, of the game. And so I think that's helped. I don't think there's any of the 4th edition newer factions that have got any warcasters or warlocks that are orientated anywhere like some of those old sort of meta-breaking casters. And so naturally, I think they've been quite mindful of what the feat is or what the personal output of those things are. You remember, like Butcher 3 when he came out? He was another one, wasn't he? I'm just gonna rub the board. Oh, you've damaged one of my dogs. I get to advance, and then I'm just gonna fly in.
Yeah, and kill everything.
Make a load of weapon master attacks, and if I somehow don't kill you with those, I'll feat and get a load more focus and just hit you some. So those sorts of elements have gone from the game. So it's not that assassination's gone from the game, but that oppressive assassination play style, I think, has certainly been toned down and moderated. And I think now if people go for an assassination, it's because they think perhaps that is currently, based upon the game state, perhaps their best chance of getting a win. So, it always used to be a get out of jail card free, didn't it? All right, I'm losing on scenario. I've lost my model.
Yeah, we used to joke about that on the show, didn't we, years ago? Like, I'm just going to go for it, and you'd be like, "Oh my god, there's a 5% chance that they do this. It'd be so annoying if it was like, I'm just going to try and kill your caster."
Yeah,
you go.
Yeah, and so
in fact, I'd done that to you before. Can't complain.
Well, I seem to recall that there was a period where I was going to tournaments, and sort of round 1, round 2, I'd sort of be in a comfortable position in the game, and your opponent would just go, "Well, I think I can get 3 attacks on your caster, so I'm going to go for it."
He's so true, and I would walk.
I'd be like, "It's 3 attacks. That's not going to work." And their argument was just, "Yeah, but I'm not going to beat you in the long game, so I'm just going to go for this."
The amount of times I've come up to a table and you'd be like, "They're going for it," and I'm like, "Going for what?" It's just like, they're just going for it. Oh my god! The scariest games were when you were playing a good player, but they would, it would be there might be a 10%er. Normally you would go for that. You'd be like, "Well, there's a 90% chance I'll win the game, just stretching it out, just playing a game." The 10%er. So there's a chance. Not like the impossible ones where you're like, that's just mad, you're not going to kill me. Where like, if all these attacks hit and they all do, average damage, well, they all go way above average damage, I might be dead.
Yeah.
Stressful.
So yeah, my experience against assassinations has been like the Anchorman aftershave. 30% of the time it works 100% of the time. And I was just like, "Oh, right, you're going for it. Well, I don't even need to do the odds on this. It's terrible." And 3 minutes later, I'm like, "Well, good game, well played." Turns out it wasn't as terrible as I thought.
Funny. If you were thinking about like the building a competitive list, or just the kind of competitive list pool. In the editions of old, it would be completely reasonable and normal to have assassination lists in that pool. So we would look at lists in old editions and be like, that is an assassination list. It's just going to try and kill you. Or it's just going to attrition you a little bit, and it's going to go for the kill. Is that still valid in this current meta, or is it typically that lists are scenario-based and, like, if there's an opportunity, there's the scope to kill them? But have those assassination lists kind of dropped off a bit?
Yeah, that would be my sense of the wider meta. 100% is... I think people now take an assassination if it's either their only or best option, or there's been a mistake in the gameplay that presents them with a really good chance of success. But very infrequently am I now seeing an assassination list. With a caster that's there to just facilitate, the battle group or the trooper models in succeeding with that assassination. So, I don't think that's anywhere near as prevalent as it used to be.
And is that a good thing? What's your kind of gut feeling with that?
I mean, it's good for me.
You don't really play assassination
because I don't have all those people constantly being successful with their 30% assassination runs.
You relying on dice has never been a good idea.
Yeah, but I think
you need to avoid dice at all costs.
Yeah, so particularly when you go to events, you don't want to go to a game, get all your models out, put them on the board, exchange lists, etc., and then top of 2, get your caster killed.
It's not fun.
And you're like, okay, well, I've got another hour and 40 before the round ends. I'll go and twiddle my thumbs for an hour. I'll go to the shop and buy that caster that's just killed me. So,
What are you buying? That army? Just smashing it.
yeah. So it probably saves you money and leaves you with less of a bitter experience or taste in your mouth as a consequence. So that's made a big difference, and also I think more subtle changes, just such as things like the deployment. So the little changes in deployment and how far onto the board you now deploy, the reduction in advanced deployment. So naturally there's that larger gap that now exists between the two armies on first turn. And because of the movement changes, or in particular the changes to how we run a model. So in the previous editions, that used to be double your speed. So a speed 7 Legion Beast would run 14 inches, probably after being slipstreamed for another 2 inches.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah. And a bit. Yeah.
So it's it's sat on the midpoint of the board in a very threatening position. But those fast models, because of movement now, have become slower overall because we now just add +5 to the movement stat. So that speed 7 model can now only run 12 inches. But that also means that the slower models have sped up a little bit. So those slower warjacks or war beasts, they still add 5 to their run distance. So now the difference that exists between a speed 7 model running in the old edition, which was 14 inches, versus a 4-inch run, doubled to 8, so a really big differential. But that has now narrowed as well. So all armies have got the capacity to generate board position, but without necessarily overemphasizing landing on that midline and really threatening as soon as you move out of deployment. I mean, there was games, I think, in Mark III where I'd move backwards on my first turn. Again, that's just not... It's not really what you want to do in a game, is it?
Having said that, I feel I'm kind of mixed about this because of how much fun I've had playing Legion over the years. It does feel, from playing Vale a bunch in this new edition, so playing P Vale, who we both have a big soft spot for as a caster. I imagine it's probably one of your most enjoyable casters.
Well, there it is, look.
There she is.
There she is.
Number one, do you think it's a caster you've enjoyed the most over the years?
Oof.
Can't be far off. It's got to be top 3.
Yeah, I mean...
It's easily top 3.
I'd have to give it some consideration, but yeah, it's going to be top 3.
But you enjoyed the caster.
Yeah, great caster. Really dynamic play style, really mobile. Yeah.
Do a bit of everything with insight. Now, playing that list, it just can't assert itself in the same way. Those angels just can't get in as threatening positions. And I get that everything's been toned down slightly, which is fine. But it does feel some of that, lethality that existed in Legion has dropped somewhat. I mean, that's something we'll pick up and maybe talk about going forward. But I remember when you said to me, I said, I'm going to play Vale. You were like, it's a different kind of vet. Don't go into that game playing I'm just going to drop everything there. You will lose a lot of stuff. So it does. Is that making it harder for some of those legacy armies that relied on some of that speed and aggression? Or are they just going about in different ways?
Yeah, I think they've just had to reimagine, haven't they, how they play and how they leverage the threat that they do have, or the strengths that they have within their models. But going back to that sort of assassination list build, very typically those assassination type lists would lean heavily into a particular model, wouldn't they? And then take 3 or 4 of a particular thing.
Yeah.
And again, the wider game changes in terms of the scenario pack and what scores scenario and how scenario is scored in terms of the proximity to the actual scoring points. I think that has resulted in people having to take more rounded and balanced lists. And that was probably some of that conversation around Vale that you're articulating there that we had, was was Vale with a load of beasts.
I put like loads of beasts.
You know,
Like,
was beautiful in Mark 3. You know, Mark
Yeah.
2. But you get into Mark 4, and those beasts have got to be complemented by some units because half the scoring points on the board will be scored by units. And so you've got to have that capacity to play both components of the scenario. And so you can't lean into as easily as you used to be able to just that very specific model tailored towards a specific caster, tailored towards a specific feat, with the aim and objective being to assassinate.
Yeah, that feels good for the overall health of the game, I guess. Like,
Yeah, I think
in
so.
terms
And
of making
I
it
think
accessible.
it's funny, isn't it? Because I always use the assassination almost as a USP in the game. You know, it's one of the ways that the game is
Yeah.
very different to a lot
Yeah.
of other games that are out there and available. That, you know, yeah, you can win by scenario, and most game systems now use that similar sort of approach, don't they? But an assassination win, you know, I can't necessarily think of a game that I've played, certainly, that has a similar mechanic to it. I don't know about you.
No, I've not played a game with
And
assassination.
so it definitely is a USP to the game. You know, it is very unique that the game could suddenly end if you lose this really valuable piece. But, you know, it never used to happen in Warhammer, you know, or Age of Sigmar. I don't think it happens in 40k. You know, you might have your most expensive model, but losing it doesn't mean you lose the game automatically. It just puts you on the back foot in terms of the long game, doesn't it, and the attrition.
Yeah, yeah. And it's nice that that's still there. I think it'll kind of come out in the discussion in a second when we start talking about Warmachine versus other systems like 40k. There are a couple of ways to lose a game, aren't there? There are ways to lose a game where you just lose suddenly, like a game like with an assassination caster kill mechanic. But then on the flip side, if you're going to play a 3-hour game and after 25 minutes you realise you're going to lose, and then you've got to sit there for 3 hours. I mean, there is something nice about just going, game's over, there we go, let's start again. Because the amount of games we would have where we just kind of re-rack, you play, you're like, okay, fine, that's how that's going to work out. Let's go back to the beginning. Let's reset, let's rewind, let's go again. What are your general reflections? It's something I've been wanting to ask you for a while and get into a little bit. What are your general reflections on where the different factions and armies are at in terms of balance at the moment? So Warmachine, and again, let me if you sort of agree with this, but over the years, I think we describe Warmachine as a pretty balanced game. But the thing that made it balanced was the fact that everything was very strong. So every single faction, like you talked about Butcher, we talked about Haley, we talked about Denegro, Kane. There were all these casters who were so good that they bent the meta, but there were so many other casters that were so good that it was just like everything is sharp, everything is hot. There wasn't, every faction would have access to like really, really strong things. In the toning down and the balancing of the game, I guess there's a risk there that you still have some outliers that you don't quite get in. Those ones that are outliers, I imagine, will be really strong. So what are your reflections on where the game's at generally in terms of balance across the different factions, both Prime and Legacy?
I think that's a really good question. And I know we don't want to get into ranking factions or going into that, or certainly don't want to do that yet. But I certainly think there's less sort of apex predators out there. You know, so, you know, if we use a Jurassic Park type reference, you know, there's less T-Rexes roaming the battlefields.
It's always animals with you when you do a ranking, so isn't it? Happy as a dog in a Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
Happy as a pterodactyl with a bone. Okay.
Yeah, well, there we go. Look, we've got one. That'd be a pretty happy pterodactyl, I think. But so there isn't those apex predators like just preying on everyone until they then face off against another apex predator and they just, you know, they butt heads. And I think that's sort of what we did have, isn't it, in sort of Mark 3, Mark 2. but like you said, the game had got to a point where those apex predators were the most common dinosaur in the park. They were the ones that everyone was bringing, and so naturally there was a lot of headbutting between these alpha dogs of the game. And so in terms of the legacy apex predators, they have gone. So we've got lots of stegosauruses roaming around now. One or two little velociraptors scampering about, but those big ones have gone, and so we've got sort of that next tier down of casters that there was greater scope in the number of them, the capabilities of them. They were all good, but none of them were necessarily outstanding. And then the newer armies, I think they've been successfully, for the most part, very mindful about not reintroducing an apex predator into our herbivore environment of dinosaurs.
I'm going to play the theme tune in the background.
Because if you do that, it's just going to prey on the weak, isn't it? So like I say, I think for the most part, they've done a good job of moderating and remaining mindful of that. I think if you were a returning player, for example, who went into the app and opened up some of the Prime factions and just had a look at the feats that the casters have in the Prime factions, you would probably skim through those, and there wouldn't necessarily be very many of them that would really jump out of you as overwhelmingly impactful or powerful. When we think back to Haley 2, models forfeit their action or movement in a control area, but then just to make that even worse,
but wait, there's more.
To make it even worse, in an order that your opponent chooses.
Yeah, it's just absolutely horrendous. In a game where you activate unit to unit.
Full activation. So then your opponent goes, well, activate those guys at the back that can't go anywhere. And you're like, okay. Well, they'll stand there. Okay, great. Now activate your Warjack before you've managed to put that spell on it that you need on it so it can do anything. I'm like, brilliant. Okay, I'll do that. And so I think if a returning player was to look through, the feats of the Prime armies, the newer armies, they'd look through them, and I think for the most part they'd be quite dismissive of a lot of those.
Yeah, this is the experience I've had. I've looked at someone just been like, that is not a good feat. That is just like really average. That's super average feat. That's a feat that you would scroll past previously in other editions. I'm looking for the kind of like enemy models can't move. They can only change faces. There we go. That's good.
So, yeah, but I suspect that's purposeful because it was those feats on those types of models that just naturally lead to that poor game experience for your opponent.
Unless they're rocking the same, unless they're like, you brought Denegro, I brought Haley, let's go.
I mean, when you get into the final round and you're still in the undefeated bracket at a tournament, that's fine, isn't it? That's what you're expecting to see. It's probably what you've played quite a lot of games against. They're expecting to see what you brought, and so at that level that was fine. But at a sort of a more recreational, club level, where you're wanting to go and roll some dice, you get to play maybe one game, a week, one game a fortnight. You want to play the game, don't you? You don't want to move up turn one, then basically miss turn two because they've feated on you. And then you get to your turn three when you can actually do something again. It turns out you've got no models left.
Which will die next turn.
Which used to happen, isn't it? It's definitely what used to happen. And so I think in terms of engaging the wider player base, I think it absolutely is it's the right direction of travel. And again, I say that from a competitive perspective. You know, I played those Apex Predators. I played against those Apex Predators. You know, at that level, there was an expectation that was, you know, that was going to be the game, wasn't it? And you invested time and effort into working out how to play those really horrible things. But I don't know whether that was for the good of the game, Paul. You know, the overall health of the game. You know, you and I liked it really. Because we're ultra competitive.
Yeah, I kind of loved it, and it definitely created a community of like-minded individuals who played the game for the same reason, and it definitely created a kind of like reputation from a community and a game where it was like, oh, that game's quite brutal. Because we would
forgiving, right?
Yeah, think how many years we played Warmachine at that club in York, and we worked hard to spread the game and bring new people into the game. We did. There was loads of, there's a bunch of people that we ended up traveling all over Europe with, playing from the York club. There's a whole community of us, but there were some people that just looked at that game, like some of the guys that played the historical games, because they'd have a go, didn't they? They would get armies and they would have a go. They'd give it a shot, and they'd just go, no, it's not for me. That's too competitive. That's too kind of like make a mistake, get absolutely smashed. And there was a lot of negotiation that you would have to do pre-list selection to make sure. Like, we'd often have a couple of lists. Most of the York guys would take like Apex lists, wouldn't they? It was a competitive group of lads. We wouldn't be like, I'm taking the worst caster, but would need.
You're right. I think you'd always have another list in your case, wouldn't you? That was, purposefully designed to give a friendlier game experience.
Yeah. So that now, I guess, from what you're saying, with the feats, because that's always the first thing I look at when I look at casting. I just go straight to the feat, because I feel like the feat always gives me an immediate vibe for how this caster's going to play. Look at the feat, and then you can work backwards. You're like, oh, this feat does this and this, so it's likely that there's these kind of spells, and there's kind of abilities. You kind of work back. But yeah, I've been looking at feats since the edition, for a while, and they're just not as scary as they were. So it's an interesting conversation, because from what you're saying, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because that reduced lethality just means that you generally get a more competitive, enjoyable game. Are there still good feats though? We're not talking about feats that are just kind of like not having any bearing on the game. Like I look at, there's kind of like, is it Helif, the Dustcaster, that's like -2 def and armor?
Yeah,
that seems good. That seems strong. Only control 12 though, but that seems good.
And then the bonus is your warrior models get the +2 def and armor as well on your turn.
Yeah,
it affects both players' turns.
That seems strong. That sort of stuff feels all right.
But I think that's a really good example, perhaps, of how the bar has changed. Because Mark III, that feat would have been average.
Yeah.
But like I say, because those really impactful feats have been removed or moderated, you're into a world now where, -2 def and armor. Well, that's in this new modern outlook of the game, that's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
But that doesn't feel anywhere near as ball busting, I don't think, as some of those other feats that we saw regularly on the table before. And it gives you something.
Some horrors.
You can also play around that a bit, can't you? How in the world did you used to have to play around a feat that just meant all your models were shadowbound and couldn't advance?
I remember at a Masters event once in Birmingham, playing Denegra 3. No, was it Denny 2 that locked you down?
Yeah.
Denny 2 on it. Do you remember when you could charge your own models as well? There was a lot of rules that were just absolutely wild. So I ran an arc node forward. I think it was, what speed was she? 7. It's 12 inches from Denegra. Charged my own arc node and just hit it once and did whatever, and then feated on the opponent's entire army. And it's just like, well, that's scary. I mean, it was a competitive environment, so everybody knew what they were, and everybody that did well in that event was taking similar lists. But yeah, it was unbelievably powerful. There were some completely bonkers casters and models, and just units and warjacks and warbeasts that were bonkers. For the balance, if we're thinking about like lists and list builds and what's in a list, you're telling me that they're generally more balanced. So people are having to take a bit more of a balanced list. You can't just like spam beasts. You can't just spam jacks. You've got to take units. You've got to have a mix of solos. What about some of the kind of big base colossal stuff? Because there was a time previously in Warmachine where like most tables you would see a colossal. Do you remember there was that era of like there was just big bases everywhere, and there were many lists where you would have 2 colossals. Where's that at? Are you seeing some of those big guys hit the table?
So I think there's probably another interesting change between the editions there that perhaps has influenced people's decision making. So previously, it used to be that your warcasters and warlocks used to have warjack points or war beast points, and so many points of their army list had to consist of a battle group, a cohort model. And typically those numbers were always like somewhere between 27 and sort of 30, 31, weren't they?
Yeah.
And so what that translated to was sort of, you could take 2 heavies to fulfill your prerequisite battle group points. Or you could spend 3 or 4 points and you could actually make that a colossal.
Put a big boy in.
Yeah. And so that satisfied that need to spend your warjack and war beast points, whereas that's gone now. And so the prerequisite there is gone. I've still got to take a battle group model, but that could just be the cheapest possible light warjack or beast, or of course it could be multiple of different loadouts, etc. So there's been that change. But then also, if you look through the Steamroller pack, most of the scenarios will have 2 typically quite distant warjack scoring artifacts. And so that colossal, so if you remember the old Steamroller pack, you could quite often with a colossal tow more than 1 zone at a time. And so you'd sort of tow the letterbox and tow the edge of the circle that was next to it, and still be 12 inches away from any enemy models, with this great big hunk of health and hitboxes, just contesting that. And so there's not, I think, the same opportunity for a singular model to influence the scenario or slow the scenario scoring currently. And so again, I think, because when I've been thinking about colossals and those huge base models, I've also been thinking about, well, I'm going to need another cohort model somewhere. I'm going to need that flexibility to actually play this wide. And what I can't afford to do is just concede flanks or zones because of the nature of how the scoring and the game is played now. And so there's, the colossal models are good. The Signar one that's coming out has got some really great rules on it. We've got, haven't we, the Abyssal King, which
it's cool.
Which, by the way, is an unbelievable model. But again, great set of rules on that. We've got the Khador Mastodon. Again, really popular with Khador players. Outstanding gun platform. But you're seeing them take that and still something else. And so the necessity to have multiple cohort models is probably keeping that colossal meta, if you like, that we've seen previously. It's keeping it at bay at the moment. And again, I think probably for the good of the game. I think as soon as you put any model that costs 1/3 of your overall army points on the board, it naturally skews the game, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And it skews the play experience. So one thing that I just, again, from wargaming for like ever, since like 12, one mechanic that I think creates a lot of feel bads is high point models that can either be really effective or take 1 more point of damage and just die and disappear. And there's a lot of games where, like, if you've got a unit and you slowly wither the unit down, then the effectiveness of the unit reduces as more models die. Or if you've got like a war beast that's, not got a ridiculous amount of hit points, you can allocate enough resources to kill it and be like, well, at least it's dead. I had to over allocate a little bit, but at least it's dead. With the big models, because there were just so many hit points, you would need sometimes everything to hit, everything to damage, and be very consistent. So there would be, I remember many games where you would have those colossals in positions where they were dominating the board, sometimes in 2 zones, which would be double feel bad, and you leave them on 4 points.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of like, it's on 4 points, it's going to get healed up a bit, it's got its cortex, like then it just goes absolutely berserk, and that creates a bit of a feel bad.
Yeah, I think the observation of how they perform compared to something like units is really insightful. When I kill half a unit, the output is halved. So I feel like I'm making progress. But killing half a colossal, which might actually be 40 points of damage you've done, and then the colossal gets to activate, and it can still do everything.
Yeah, that's rough.
And so your investment isn't reflected in then the output that you get in retaliation in the same way that against units and infantry would be. So yeah, like I said, it's a really, really insightful observation, but it definitely impactful on the game.
Yeah, and this kind of brings us on to something. The other thing we're going to get into on this is like, how does Warmachine now, its current state, compared to other games? What's that play experience like at the table compared to other games? So I've spent a lot of time in the past couple of years playing 40k and still do. You've spent a lot of time in the past few years playing MCP. Two kind of interesting comparisons there, because MCP is a lot of the old Warmachine guys, right? People that we used to play at the WTC,
in terms of
like
the game,
Pagani and stuff.
In terms of the game design, it's a lot of the old Privateer Press guys that moved across there, and you can definitely see that influence in the game. The superheroes all generate power.
Yeah.
And a Warmachine player would be very familiar with spending that power to do cool things.
Yeah.
And so a lot of those interactions are very Warmachine in I think orientation and origin.
Throws and slams from memory. I played a bunch of MCP.
Yeah, you can throw models, you can throw terrain. So yeah, the throw mechanic, which again is probably one of those USPs to Warmachine, or was a USP to Warmachine. Didn't exist in other games, that type of interaction. So those things exist. The rule set for MCP is really tight. It's clearly written. It's not a game that you have to open a rule book every time you play the game. It's a lot of common sense rules once you've played it a few times. And when something weird happens, you can normally recognize it again without looking at the rule book. Well, that doesn't seem right. And when you get that intuition, you're probably correct. It's not right.
Yeah.
A lot of core mechanics, if you like, similarities.
There did feel a difference though of MCP in terms of the dice mechanic felt, and we would joke about this because me and you've played a bunch of MCP together, and I've come up to York with a bunch of other games, and I played some games down there actually. It is those dice are pretty mad in MCP. Yeah. You'd be like, but I've done 1 million damage, you're dead. Or you'd be like, nothing. Whereas I rarely got that experience playing Warmachine. The dice mechanic, I think, in Warmachine is one of the most relevant. If you're going to explain and talk about the game to someone versus other games, the dice mechanic in Warmachine feels such a relevant part of that discussion. Because, yeah, you're still rolling dice. But the 2d6 mechanic is such a solid system that's a reliable, consistent system versus... are they 8-sided MCP?
Yeah, so the huge variance in result that you get from MCP dice, and then the mechanic of MCP where you can actually add more dice if you roll certain symbols on the dice as well. When you get a critical, you get to add extra attack dice to the roll. So, like you say, when you get a good roll, you tend to get a really, really, really good roll. Whereas, like you say, the Warmachine 2d6, 3d6 system, in so much as we can with dice, has got a predictable curve to it, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the 2 dice and basing your numbers around the average being 7 on 2 dice, 10 on, or 7.5, whatever, 10.5, or, 7 on 2 and 10 on 3 does allow you to create plans and strategies by which you allocate resources to achieving those numbers that you require.
Yeah,
And
with
kind of
a
like,
pretty decent degree of accuracy, you can predict
yeah,
outcome of attacks, of damage,
yeah,
likelihood of killing something. You know, it's an open information game, and there's no saves. You know, which I'm sure you'll talk
well,
about in a
that
second about in
that is
40k. But you know, so you know, in Warmachine, if you beat someone's armor, they take damage by the amount you beat the armor by, and that's it. Done.
yeah,
Mark it
no
up.
more.
It's damage.
And unless something's got tough, in which case, when it's reduced to 0, you roll a dice on a 5 or a 6, it returns to health with 1 hit point, but it's sat down, so it can't pass another tough roll. So that is not like a infinite. I'll just keep rolling 5 ups. It does bounce it out. I found it really interesting, like experience playing a bunch of 40k with, well, however long we played Warmachine for, forever. Because the bit that really sticks for me in terms of how the two games play strategically, like they're both dice games, you're both rolling dice, you're painting models, you're moving around a board. Like to a layperson, Warmachine looks like 40k. This is Warhammer, right? You've got models on the table that you've painted. You're using a tape measure. You're rolling dice and you're moving stuff around. Yeah, fine. Or you know, it's even got zones or objectives on the board that you're fighting over. Yeah, all looks like that. But the fundamental difference is the phase-based Warhammer 40,000 rules mechanic and the Warmachine unit-based mechanic. So it's kind of like in 40k, everything moves. Everything shoots, things charge, things fight, end of phase, go to the opponent. So from a strategic perspective,
I mean, I was going to say, how do you plan anything?
you make a plan at the beginning of the turn, and you hope that that plan goes to plan, and then you can adapt to some extent. But once you've moved your stuff and you've shot your stuff, then you're kind of in. The bit that's really weird about that strategically, and that I've always struggled with, is you imagine that as a mechanic: move, shoot, fight, and turn. Then you can actually deny someone so much strategy by just moving. So what you find, and I've watched, we stream the UKTC events, probably the biggest, most well-attended, you know, competitive gaming event in the world. With no shadow of a doubt the best Warhammer players in the world. Like these guys are incredible 40k players. But what they essentially do, the best players, is they screen out like just most of the board with units and spread across the board. So they control a lot of the board with their models, and then they hold bits of the board with their models to score points on scenario. And the fact that you move and then shoot and then charge means that if someone just gets an absolute dump of a unit and just puts it in front of all your models, you can't move past those models. You can do some manipulation in the fight phase, but it's fairly limited, and good players don't let you do that. So that, for me, it's not as rewarding as having a game where you activate unit by unit by unit. So like you said, how do you work out strategy? Well, at the beginning of your turn, you kind of develop a strategy, and then you roll the dice and you hope it goes to plan. The thing I really appreciate about Warmachine is the fact that your plan can evolve and change over the turn. So you're constantly engaged in the turn, trying to work out how you develop a strategy to respond to what your opponent's doing, right? So, oh, there's a really crap unit that's blocking me from getting into this zone. Well, that's all right. These guys could go first and kill that unit, and then this unit could go there and put an angle on that unit. So you kind of like unload a turn. 40k, slightly different experience with that. And
okay, so in 40k then, and in Warmachine, this happens all the time where Unit 1 activates to try and clear, like you say, that blocking unit. But when it fails, I do have the capacity to just reevaluate my whole plan.
Yeah.
And the capacity to sort of pivot strategically and go, oh, well, that's not worked now. So that Warjack can't charge there and kill that. So as a consequence, I'm going to have to almost abandon that first idea of a strategy.
Yeah.
And maybe that Warjack now can contribute over here to set up an alternate strategy. And so I think your turn constantly can evolve, can't it, and change and pivot in Warmachine.
Yeah.
But it sounds like what you're describing in 40k is that if your first unit combat action doesn't go to plan, well, you're a bit screwed because the second unit...
Yeah, you're in trouble. You're in trouble.
The
And
second
you hear
unit
that a lot of players.
has already committed, and the third unit's already committed.
You're in. And you'll hear that a lot. So you'll hear a lot of players be like, "Oh, well, that didn't work. Yeah, there we go. I've lost now." You will, even at like a really, really high level, you'll hear the players just say to each other, "Yeah, no, that didn't work." That's what I mean about the risk. I've not quite worked out how to articulate this properly yet. 'Cause I probably, just need to keep thinking about it because I've not really been comparing the two games for very long. But it's kind of like you're trying to manage the risk. You're trying to take the best risks. You try to take the risks that have the highest chance of success. But ultimately, when you speak to those players that win events, the luck has played a factor. And you'll have like these players who are absolutely unbelievable at the game, but they've not won a tournament in like a year and a half. But they're absolutely amazing. And what you tend to find is the 40k players that are doing really well, there'll be a combination of, they're obviously, this isn't to, I'm not in any way trying to undermine how good these 40k, like they're all really smart guys. It's not like an easy game to play or be good at by any means. But it's kind of like they've had luck, good luck, and they're playing the right faction at the right time. So you never see like a random faction when it's like the faction that's just come out or just got the latest buff wins. It's sometimes the guys that just have been playing that faction for quite. It's like one of their core factions that they've kind of stuck with. Yeah. Suddenly come around to winning. So that's one big difference. And the other one that I kind of have a real aversion to as a strategy, as a mechanic in a game, is saving throws. So I think saving throws are bad for a game. They're good. They're good because we get endorphins from rolling dice, don't we? Like the reason we enjoy this game is it's like the rolling of the dice and the kind of like oh come on, let's get it. People find that fun, and like 40k is obviously built around that.
Do endorphins lead to anger? I thought endorphins were normally a positive thing.
Endorphins lead to anger. They're normally a what?
I thought endorphins were normally a positive thing.
Yes, your experience is
well,
slightly
I
different.
mean, when
to
I
most
roll
people's
dice,
yeah.
there's no endorphins going on there at all.
Dice lead to anger.
I'm just grateful if they're above a 2.
Yeah, don't play 40k. You have the worst time of your life. There's way too much dice rolling it. But it's kind of like, so you can do everything in the world to make sure you stack your abilities to hit and then to wound. But ultimately, because your opponent has a saving throw, it just kind of ends. It adds this end skew to everything where it's just all a bit random, and you have a huge amount of 4-up invuns or 4-up feel no pains and abilities that just. On a 4-up, I don't take any damage. But that damage could be so much that it kills a model. So that conversation we were just having around Colossals, we've just talked about like a feel-bad experience of a Colossal where you just don't do enough damage. That could happen. But because there's no saving throw in Warmachine, if you calculated it correctly, you could kill a Colossal, right?
Yeah,
if you stack the right buffs, you can really make sure you kill something. You could go, there is an 85% chance I kill this model, often in Warmachine, right? In 40k, because of the kind of 4-up invuln type mechanic, you could stack everything in your favor to get this damage through. But if your opponent on one dice rolls a 4-up, then they don't take all the damage that was going to kill that big model. So again, from an enjoyment perspective, if you just want to roll dice and have fun and almost like appreciate the thematic of a game, the story and the narrative. Oh, I can't believe that guy lived and then killed all my stuff. Fine. But if you want a game where you're like, oh, best player won, shake your hand at the table.
Yeah.
Those mechanics are quite far from Warmachine, and I've taken a lot of flack. I'll probably take flack from this because I think because that's what people have played and always been used to. They've not appreciated the other systems. So the people that have only played 40k competitively, their experience of what a competitive game looks and feels like is skewed by their absorption into 40k. But once you step out and play other systems and play Warmachine, and Warmachine's, we've just admitted it's not without its flaws. Like it's had issues in previous editions. We're not blinded by this. We know it's had its issues. But ultimately, those mechanics that it was built around, I think, provide a much more cleaner play experience. And by that I mean, at the end of the game, you go best player won and you shake hands.
Yeah. And I think that's definitely the case in Warmachine. Is 90% of your games, it is the player that played the best in that game has come out with the victory. Absolutely. Do you play time turns or on a clock or anything in 40k?
Don't get me started on this. You find two things genuinely hilarious about it. I would love to watch you play 40k competitively. It's two things are really mad. One is measurement. Some of the measurements you see are genuinely unbelievable. Genuinely unbelievable. from going from a game where everything was kind of like gentleman, like it was like a gentleman's agreement that you would use widgets to make sure everybody was happy with the movement, and it was just kind of like part of the game. And some people looked at that almost like down their nose at Warmachine and be like, "Oh, that's really people are really funny in that." But it's actually the opposite. It's actually kind of like it's almost like respectful to the opponent to be
it's
like,
just
"I want to
being
make
really
sure this
transparent about what you're doing and how you're doing it, and
It's not being funny. It's that people, it's actually the opposite. Whereas in 40k, because people just use a measure. I mean, you'll see it on some of the streams. You see people move the model, and it's just like it's clearly gone further than it is. There's no etiquette around measuring sticks, and because the ranges are so long, like measuring sticks also would be super clunky because the range is long. So that's weird. And then on a clock, clocks sometimes are a bit wild. So players will time the round, but then like if you get to the end, sometimes people are like, oh, don't worry about it. I'm not going to clock you. So like you'll see this on competitive games, high level tables. People go, don't worry about it. If you run out of clock, I'm not going to clock you. I want to finish this game properly. You're like, okay. So it's not like Warmachine where if your clock runs out, that it's built into the rules pack that like that you lose the game. It's more like, if your clock runs out, then you can almost like gentleman's agreement it a little bit. There are some like
they are playing on a clock though.
Technically, in a lot of the big events, if you go into round 3 undefeated, you need to play on a clock, and the clock round needs to start when the round time starts. But it's not disciplined, so it's completely
still a bit cavalier and Wild West then.
Oh, it's unbelievably cavalier because there's no etiquette on the management of the clock. So in Warmachine,
and so is it like a chess clock? They have a certain amount of time.
It's a chess clock, but it's not managed appropriately. So, we would be playing a game on a chess clock, and I would say, Brett, can I just ask you a question about this model? And you'd say, of course, Paul. Then you'd knock it on my time, and that would be completely normal. I would expect you to put it on my time, and I'd ask you the question. You go, thanks, put it back. If I then had to make a roll or make a decision, you would put it on my clock. 40k, and Warmachine works like that because I'm not really rolling dice in your turn, am I? It's your turn. You do your thing. Unless I'm Grimkin, I'm not messing with your turn. Which is another thing. You do your thing. But in 40k, like, I fight in your turn. So in your turn, my models will fight you in the fight phase. But players just do that on your clock. So we're doing your fight phase, my model's attacking you on your clock, and players don't always knock it back over.
It'd take me a while to find all them dice I need to roll in your clock, I reckon.
Mate, you should see there's some wild stuff that goes through.
And then have I got to separate all the 4-ups from that dice roll?
Mate, it takes forever.
Oh, that'd take me a while as well. I'd clock you on your turn.
Yeah, but if you
I like a good triple jump. Like Tom Cruise in Cocktail. Here we go.
Yeah. Oh, I'm just going to get a drink. It's like wandering off. Yeah, it's very different, but it still for sure can be played competitively, but it's a very, very different play experience. I'm really, one of the things I'm really interested and excited about the future of Warmachine is the dialing down of it in terms of some of the things we've discussed today does open it up to the general market, the broader gaming market. And that's where I think Warmachine can shine, because it can be that balance between, here is a rule set where the best player wins nearly all the time. I mean, sure, it's still a dice game. We both know that, like, you can lose games, just based on the dice. But it's delivered in a way where it's casual. It's not that kind of hyper competitive lose your caster, it's game over. I think that balance is going to be really interesting. And 40k is still a great game. It's still a really fun, enjoyable game to play that's played at a really high level. But
so I'll just tell you of a recent anecdote of me observing a 40k game. So I mean, for clarification, so I've never played 40k, but I've heard enough people talk about it to have a concept of some of its flaws and weaknesses. So I was at Element Games over in Manchester for a Warmachine event, and there was a 40k event going on in the other half of the sort of gaming hall, and we were queuing for lunch, and so I think we were waiting for like the Subway or Domino's delivery, whatever it was. So the queue had stopped. So I was stood sort of overlooking a 40k game, and my ears pricked up because I heard what sounded like a very Warmachine narrative going on and discussion going on between the players about, I'm just going to check if this is in, and got the tape measure out and measured something and was like, oh, well, if I get there, I think it must have been a transport or something, because he then said, the models will get out and go and do something else. So it perked my interest, because I was like, oh, this sounds like quite a nuanced discussion about a negotiation that something can work and should work, and this is where the model's going to go, and if it goes there, then these models can charge that. So I'd started paying attention and watching what was happening. But what I couldn't do is I couldn't see the model that the player was referring to, because it was behind a building. So I was paying attention, watching everything that was going on, and so they had this discussion. They got to the end. They're like, yeah, I agree. That's all fine. And then the player picked up the model from behind the building and placed it in front of the building. So this was the first time I got to see the model that was doing this. And the model, and so at the point of moving, there was no tape measure. Like, it just got placed roughly where they'd been discussing. But the model he moved had no base.
Mate, this is the thing.
And so
they don't do bases. It's just the edge of the model.
I genuinely burst out laughing. I was like, well,
you're like, what's good?
What have you been measuring from? And when all these troops disembark the transport, where are they getting placed?
Mate, yeah, this is the thing. No, it's just from the edge of the model. It's mad.
And so I was just in the middle of this queue, and I genuinely laughed out loud at what I'd just observed, because I'd become really invested and thinking, maybe it's changed, maybe it's got better, maybe like I've got the wrong end of the stick for this. And then I saw what had happened, and I was just like, well, there's no base. You've just moved that and put it wherever you wanted. And now things have appeared. And so
that's wild.
I just couldn't process and compute like the conversation with then the action that followed the conversation.
Yeah, that's funny. Well, this will be a similar reaction to this. There's this thing in 40k called playing with intent, right? And I've again got grief for talking about this. People got very upset by this. But there's a thing in 40k where if let's say me and you are playing each other, and I walk these models up, like I walk a unit up behind a ruin, and I go, my intent is so that model there that you've got can't see them. And you have a look and go, yeah, that's fine. If I've kind of declared that intent, then that's kind of what we've agreed on the table. So it's kind of like, it's kind of a rule by which you just let someone know that, look, this might not be right on the table, but it's what I want to be right. Do you see what I mean? Or you'll say like, right, I'm going to put these guys here. My intent is that they're an inch from the wall and you can't charge me. So if you then measure it and they're not an inch from a wall, you're like, well, my intent was for it to be like that. And you'll see bits where someone's like, oh, I'll move this to here, I'll shoot that model. And they'll go, oh, my intention was for you to not be able to see that. They go, okay, well, that's all right then. So it's a very different world to one where it's like, well, it can it or can't see it. In fact, a lot of people talk about 40k now as almost being like a little bit of a cooperative game, because for it to work at the table, you do need constant communication with your opponent. It needs to be this constant kind of like, this is going here, is that you're happy with this, that's this. And again, it's all relevant to how does it compare? Because like the other thing that is very, very different about the two systems is in Warmachine, as we've talked about, you lose your caster, you end the game. Or what's the current scoring system? You've got to be 3 ahead at the end of your opponent's turn.
Correct, yeah.
To win. So two things that end the game. So really all you need to keep track of is what's the score. How many are you on? How many am I on? And whose turn is it? What score are we on? Is my caster dead?
Oh, and what turn is it as well?
Turn score is my caster dead. 40k, you've got to keep track of the turn, how many CPs you're both on. CPs are a resource that you can use to re-roll the dice. The primary score, the primary is how many points you're scoring based on objectives that are predetermined on the board. The how those objectives are scored based on the mission, which is different. There are like 10 missions. So how many points you score and how you score them are different for every mission. You also randomly draw a mission rule. So mission rules add an extra rule on top of the mission that you need to remember and keep account of. Every turn, you draw from a deck 2 cards, and they're your secondary missions that you have to do that turn. And you draw new ones every single turn. So you're tracking turn, CP, primary score, mission rule, secondary cards, and then on top of that, you need to be aware of like everything that's going on, all the different models. So you track
and that all
quite a lot.
combines to give you a what, like a match
All that,
score or something.
Yeah, all that comes together to score you points, and then at the end of the game, whoever's got the most points wins. So it's a very, there are multiple layers to it. And again, the other thing that I've got a lot of flack for saying.
So I need to bring an Excel spreadsheet to keep track of these things.
You have to use an app. You basically have to use quite a
there's
comprehensive
genuinely
app.
an app.
Yeah, you have to use a comprehensive app that tracks all this stuff and gives you little reminders and stuff. And if you don't have that, then you've got to write it down. But again, something I've got flack for is 40k. So how do you, if we imagine this sort of scale, you've got chess here. Chess is at the most competitive game. No luck. It's just pure. Okay, fine. Whoever's white has a tiny chance, but like, there's no luck involved. Best player wins. Then over this side, you've got heads. Flip a coin, heads or tails. It's just pure random who wins. I think you want to try and be in the middle, don't you? You want to try and move. You don't want chess. You don't want. We want to roll dice. You know what I mean? Like we want to roll dice. But if you want to avoid getting over here, then don't introduce random mechanic after random mechanic after random mechanic. So not only are you rolling loads of dice and all these saving throws, but you're then randomly drawing missions which are all completely different every single turn. So it's like another random. You can't. Anyway, it's a lot to keep track of.
I mean, it sounds like a lot.
Versus what's the score? 5-4. Okay, cool. 5-4. Right.
I mean,
cool.
it sounds like playing football. Oh, we immediately lose half the people that are listening. I understand that, but my sports analogy.
It's football.
But you'll appreciate it because I know you like football. But it's like playing football and getting to the end of the game and going, right, what's the score? Oh, well, we won 4-1. But then me going, all right, well, that's great, but how many corners did you have?
yeah.
All right, yeah. And what about yellow cards? How many yellow cards did you have? Right, yeah, okay. And hang on a minute, what was the random card that we drew? Oh, and that says one of your players needs to wear the shirt back to front. Right, okay, that gets you some bonus points. Right, let me just add all those up. And to do that, I need to actually go to the VAR system because it's too complicated to do on pitch. And they process that, and then they come back and go, yeah, so the score was 4-1, but in actual fact, you lost 23-18.
Yeah, it was the vibe. You would like.
That's literally what you've just described to me.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I'm going to get so much flack. To be honest, I'm glad we've done this at the end because like the 40k crowd probably won't have got to this bit. So that's fine. Like I'm happy to like fire more shot. There is just like wild mechanic after wild mechanic. The other thing, just to kind of the last one of these rants, because I could go on about it forever. The other thing that's really weird is if I said to you, screening's really important, right? You're immediately thinking of models that go in front of other models to screen them and protect them from your high value assets. So like we often in Warmachine would screen with units that were very durable but low points so that I could protect my more valuable assets, right? Screening setup. In 40k, because of move, shoot, fight mechanic, everything moves, everything shoots, everything fights, then the screening concept is actually just about putting things in the way and kind of spreading around the board. So it's like you end up with this kind of system where, because so much of the game you can deep strike and just appear anywhere on the board, 9 inches away from something, you kind of screen and spread out to stop people deep striking. So it becomes kind of like a positional, where do I put my models rather than what I'm killing? And often it doesn't really matter how much you're killing. You don't play the game to be like, I'm going to kill all your stuff. You play the game to be like, I'm going to score on these points and I'm going to have to... Because a lot of the cards you draw will be like, you need to have this unit in this corner. You need a unit in each corner of the board, each section of the board. So that's not really about killing your opponent. It's about moving all your stuff everywhere. So it's kind of like, it feels like a board game. You know, a board game with multiple mechanics?
Yeah.
There's board games that are kind of like Star Wars Rebellion, where there's just like lots going on. It's a bit like that, rather than the strategy that you're trying to develop zoning in on a very core objective. How many points do I score? Can I kill the caster? Instead, it's like, how do I spread all my models out across the table to stop my opponent doing that? And how do I have models that can jump up and go everywhere and all that sort of thing?
And so...
It's a lot.
And so, I've already identified I've never played 40k. But how you've described winning a game, to me, sounds like a barrier to starting the game. It sounds really complicated.
Yeah, there's a lot.
And like I say, maybe that's just my my personal impression of it. But that seems a lot of things that I need to be keeping track of and have an idea of and have an understanding of, rather than necessarily just being able to focus on, these 4 core areas of the board that you need to be fighting over or trying to control. Because then I've got to have an understanding of what all these random missions might be and what all these other bonus
you've got to know the deck.
before.
But this is a different. It's a great game if you just want to roll some dice and kind of just enjoy rolling dice and seeing what happens. You can't. A bit like we might used to play like Riot Quest or whatever else. You just who cares? It's just a laugh. We're just messing around. It's just a bit of fun. You just you're just having a laugh at the table. There are some limitations, I think, to it being regarded as a balanced competitive game. Again, that's going to trigger people. That's going to really upset people because a lot of people think very differently, and I'm sure they can articulate reasons for how they think like that. I've had enough of these conversations with people, over the past few years. But it's horses for courses. Some people prefer those sort of systems. But from having played both, that's the best way I can describe it. It's kind of like in Warmachine, your strategy can kind of hone in. And you can really absorb it. 40k, I feel like I'm just having to remember a lot. I feel like the skill in 40k is often about memory, being trying to remember and keep account of lots of things and lots of information, and trying to design a strategy based on all the possibilities of all those different things. And that obviously requires intelligence. Again, that's why the people that win these games are smart people. None of these are daft, lucky people. They're all really, really bright lads and lasses. Well, lads who've been playing for like absolutely ages. They're all really, really good at the game. But it's that kind of, to get good at it, that's what you have to do. You have to have really good memory recollection and be able to juggle lots of things at the same time. And you have to be lucky. Warmachine, you kind of like your strategy, I find more enjoyable because you kind of hone in on how do I kill the caster? How do I get more points? And I've not quite worked out how to articulate that yet, but the experience of playing it does allow you to lock in versus playing a board game where there are 5 mechanics. That's how I describe 40k. So it's a board game where there are 5 different mechanics, and you're like, oh, okay, well, there's this and there's that and the other. Pretty different. Still a bit of fun though,
No, like it.
Don't think you're going to be running Split anytime soon after that.
I mean, nothing you've described there makes me think I'd like to try 40k.
Yeah, fair.
Very fair.
That would be really annoying if you started playing 40k right now. I feel like that'd be such a disastrous story arc for us doing this. Like,
sorry. I'm not available to podcast next week because, in actual fact, I've picked up 40k. Yeah. How that's been described as a game mechanic, from my background and what really like stimulates me and inspires me to play games. It doesn't do a lot for me to think, oh, I'd like to give that a try. But equally, I understand that the conversation we've had there, for a lot of people, they'll be like, oh, that sounds really engaging and intricate, and that definitely would be their bag and really get them on board. But
it's the law,
fascinating divergent like approach to a miniatures game, right?
Yeah. And the thing that if we're going to like that sort of 40k versus Warmachine thing, the people get into the lore of 40k and they invest in that. Like people really get into the lore. They read book, and me included. I love the 40k lore. So there's this like investment in the IP, and then the game is one element of that. It's that kind of like that's my vibe. I think about that universe all the time. Brett, doing good there, mate. Good follow on from our last show. What is the next game you've got coming up? What's on the horizon? You got any events in the calendar that you're thinking about, or I know you're doing the league at the club?
Yeah, so we've got the league ticking along nicely. So that sort of accommodates our Monday evening games. I've got some of the locals mithering me for a sort of a weekend, sort of end of week type game. Not sure how we'll get away with that, with it being Valentine's this weekend.
Yeah, you might struggle with that, mate.
Little reminder, geeks. For those of you that have got girlfriends, probably not many.
Buy stuff tomorrow. Shots fired.
But if you have, don't forget.
Buy stuff.
Yeah.
We're doing the stream. We're meant to be doing the stream tonight. Me and Rob were going to have a game on, but he's got flu, and he's been a good gentleman. It's just good etiquette these days. If you're really ill, tell someone. Do you know what I mean? I've had a lot of experiences over the years where like, I've had a game with someone. I played at a lad's house the other night. Lovely lad, Lou. I said this on the show the other night. Great guy. I had a really fun game of one with him a few weeks ago. Turned up, got me set up, models out, met his brother, shook his brother's hand. Lovely to meet you, mate. Nice and up close and personal with him. Say hi to Lou. And then after shaking his hand and being close to him, he goes, "Oh, just recovering from norovirus today." I've just shook your hand. And he went, "Oh, yeah, we've all had norovirus. Kids ill." Oh, lovely. I was like, "Where's your bathroom?" Wash my hands.
I need to go and sanitize.
Scrubbing all the skin off my hands. Bloody hell. Right, thanks for watching, folks. Appreciate you all. In fact, I'll do my own little outro, I'm sure. But Brett, appreciate it, mate. Thanks for jumping on. I get tangled in the wires of my headphones. And you'll be back on again. We'll be doing this regularly. And we're going to see some extra faces as well, which is exciting. Some faces of old.
Then it'll become carnage.
Then it will definitely become carnage.
This nice, mature, articulate content will degenerate into something entirely different.
All the riffraff come on.
Indeed.
All right, mate. We'll see you next time.
Okay, take care, everyone.
So there you go, folks. That was me and Brett talking about Warmachine. Hope you enjoyed that show as much as I did recording it with my good friend Brett. We'll be back with more Warmachine content in the very near future. We've actually got a very exciting thing to reveal in the next few days on the channel. So if you're watching this, make sure you like and subscribe to see that. I hope you're having a good day, looking after yourselves. If you're a 40k player and I've upset you, you can come at me in the comments. I don't mind. Get it out your system. Just get it out. Get it out. Look after yourself, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.